It was a Friday night in October. The kind of night where autumn's chill seeps through the windows and makes the house feel too quiet, like the silence itself is holding its breath. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with mechanical precision, each second stretching longer than it should. My parents had gone out for their monthly dinner date, a tradition they'd maintained since before I was born. They'd left me with the usual instructions: homework first, then TV, and don't answer the door for strangers. At 15, I hardly needed babysitting, but their concern was endearing in its own way. I'd finished my algebra homework in record time, eager to claim my reward of mindless television. The living room felt cozy, with just the lamp in the corner casting warm light across the familiar furniture. I settled into the worn leather couch, remote in hand, and flicked through channels until I found the Friday night cartoon block. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Animated heroes fought ridiculous villains, witty dialogue filled the spaces between commercial breaks, and the laugh track provided a comfortable backdrop to my solitude. The house's silence retreated, replaced by the friendly chaos of Saturday morning cartoons airing on Friday night. But then, at exactly 9:47 p.m., I remembered because I glanced at the digital clock on the cable box. The screen flickered. It wasn't the usual quick flash of a signal hiccup. This was different, deliberate. Like someone had reached through the screen and adjusted the brightness dial just for a moment before setting it back. When the show resumed, something felt wrong. The colors were too saturated, too sharp, as if someone had cranked the contrast to an unnatural level. The cartoon characters moved with stuttering jerks, their animation choppy and unsettling. Mickey Mouse's smile stretched too wide. Donald Duck's voice carried an edge of malice I'd never noticed before. I reached for the remote, thinking maybe the cable box needed a reset, but before my fingers could press any buttons, the screen went completely black. Not the soft black of a powered-off television, but an absolute void that seemed to absorb the room's light. The sudden silence was so complete, it made my ears ring. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to have stopped ticking. Then came the hiss. It started as barely a whisper, like the sound of air escaping from a tire or water running through distant pipes. I leaned forward, straining to identify the source. The television speakers? The heating system? But as I listened, the sound grew clearer, more distinct. Static, but not random electronic noise. This static had rhythm, patterns, like Morse code transmitted through white noise. The edges of the black screen began to glow with faint phosphorescent snow, tiny points of light that crawled inward like luminous insects, devouring the darkness pixel by pixel. I pressed the power button on the remote. Nothing. I tried changing channels, adjusting volume, even hitting the side of the remote in case the batteries were dying. The screen remained unchanged, the static growing louder and more insistent. Shapes began to form in the snow. At first they were just suggestions, darker patches that might have been shadows or might have been imagination. But as the static organized itself, the images became clearer, more defined. It looked like old film footage, the kind you see in history documentaries, grainy and overexposed. A hallway materialized on the screen. It was long and narrow, stretching far beyond what the perspective should have allowed. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows that danced with the static. The walls were institutional green, the kind of color you find in old hospitals or government buildings. Doors lined both sides at regular intervals, each one closed, each one identical. As the view moved forward with mechanical precision, as if mounted on a camera dolly, rolling down the corridor at exactly 3 miles per hour, no footsteps accompanied the movement, only the ever-present static that had now grown to fill the room. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to get up, walk away, call someone, but I couldn't move. The image held me transfixed, like staring into headlights or watching a car accident unfold in slow motion. The camera, or whatever was recording this, continued its steady progress down the endless hallway. Door after door passed by, 101, 102, 103, each number painted in fading black letters. Some doors had windows, but they were all dark inside. Others were solid wood with brass handles that caught the flickering fluorescent light. As the view moved deeper into the building, the static began to change. Instead of random white noise, patterns emerged. Voices, distant and distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite understand. Sometimes I caught fragments, like, "shouldn't be here," "watching," "find you." The temperature in my living room seemed to drop. I pulled my hoodie tighter around my shoulders, but the cold felt like it was coming from inside the television, radiating outward through the screen. Then the movement stopped. The camera had reached the end of the hallway, facing a final door marked "emergency." But this door was different from the others. Where the rest have been painted institutional green, this one was deep red, the color of dried blood. And unlike the others, this door was slightly ajar. Words appeared on the screen, white letters superimposed over the image. "You shouldn't have watched this." I dropped the remote. It clattered to the hardwood floor, the batteries spilling out and rolling under the couch. The words remained on screen, burning themselves into my retinas. The static grew so loud it hurt, like standing next to a jet engine or inside a breaking wave. And then everything changed. The hallway vanished. The static faded to a whisper. In its place was my living room. The exact same angle, the same furniture arrangement, the same corner lamp casting its warm light. But I wasn't in it. The room on the screen was empty, perfectly still except for the slow pan of the camera as it moved across the space. It captured everything with impossible detail. The remote batteries scattered on the floor, the slight indentation in the couch cushion where I had been sitting, even the condensation ring from my glass of water on the coffee table. But no me. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. On the screen, the camera continued its sweep of the empty room, moving with that same mechanical precision I'd seen in the hallway. It panned left towards the kitchen doorway, then right towards the front hall, then back to center on the couch. My couch, where I had been sitting, where I was no longer sitting. The whispers in the static became clearer. "We see you. We see you. We see you." I backed away from the television, but the screen followed my movement. Not the image, that remained fixed on the empty living room, but something else, a presence, a watching. The camera on the screen began to move again, but this time it wasn't panning, it was approaching, moving closer to the couch, to where I had been, to where something was still watching. And then I realized the horrible truth. The camera wasn't moving closer to the couch, it was moving closer to me. The real me, standing in the real room. But that was impossible. I was watching the television was showing my room, The television couldn't see me watching it. Could it? A new sound joined the static. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, like someone standing just behind my shoulder. I spun around, but the living room was empty. When I looked back at the screen, words were forming again. Turn around. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I ran. I bolted towards the kitchen, my sock-covered feet sliding on the hardwood. Behind me, I heard something that might have been laughter or might have been the static reaching a new crescendo. I grabbed the cordless phone from its cradle and frantically dialed 911. Dead air. No dial tone, no busy signal, nothing.
The phone's display showed full bars and a strong connection, but when I held it to my ear, there was only silence. I tried my parents' cell phones. Same result. My best friend's number. Nothing. It was as if the entire world had gone quiet, leaving only me and whatever was in that television. When I turned back toward the living room, I could see the screen glowing from the kitchen doorway. Not the harsh glare of static, but a soft, almost inviting light. Against every rational thought in my head, I crept back to look. The television now showed the kitchen where I stood. Perfect detail, perfect angle, perfect timing. I watched myself on the screen, holding the dead phone, staring at the television. Every movement I made was mirrored exactly, except for one crucial detail. The version of me on screen was looking at something I couldn't see. Its eyes tracked movement in the empty air above and behind my real position, following something that cast no shadow, made no sound, but was clearly there. On screen, the other me began to mouth words. I couldn't hear them, but I could read lips well enough to understand. Behind you, behind you, behind you. I felt breath on the back of my neck. Not warm human breath, but cold air that smelled of ozone and copper pennies. Every hair on my arms stood up. The temperature in the kitchen plummeted until I could see my own breath misting in the air. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, the way my mother had taught me to do during thunderstorms when I was small. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Just a hallucination, just fear playing tricks. 4 Mississippi. 5 Mississippi. When I opened my eyes, the television screen was black. Not the consuming void from before, but normal, powered-down black, the kind you get when you hit the off button. The sudden return of silence was almost as startling as the static had been. I heard my parents' car in the driveway. I ran to the front door and threw it open before they could even get out of the car. My father took one look at my face and immediately went into protective mode. "What's wrong? What happened?" I tried to explain, but the words sounded crazy even to me. A haunted television? A camera that could see me? Static that spoke in whispers? They exchanged the look that parents share when they're trying to decide if their teenager is having a breakdown or just watched too many horror movies. "Let's go inside and check everything out," my mother said gently. But when we entered the living room, the television was off. Completely off. The power cord lay unplugged on the floor behind the entertainment center, as if it had been pulled from the wall with considerable force. The cable box displayed no time, no channel information, nothing. "Did you unplug it?" my father asked. I shook my head. I hadn't touched the power cord. I'd only used the remote, which still lay on the floor with its batteries scattered. My parents spent 20 minutes checking every electronic device in the house. Everything worked perfectly. The television turned on without issue, displaying normal channels with normal programming. They even found the exact cartoon show I was watching, still airing on the Friday night block. "See?" my mother said, settling onto the couch. "Everything's fine. Maybe you dozed off and had a vivid dream." But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, and I never watched that television alone again. For weeks afterwards, I made sure I was never in the living room by myself after dark. When my parents went out, I'd retreat to my bedroom with my laptop, keeping the door open and all the lights on. The television remained unplugged unless someone else was using it. But avoidance only works for so long in your own home. About a month later, I was coming downstairs for a glass of water around midnight when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The living room was dark, the television unplugged just as I had left it, but the screen wasn't completely black. There was the faintest glow, barely visible, like the last ember of a dying fire. And in that dim light, I could just make out shapes moving in the depths of the glass. I stood in the hallway for 10 minutes watching. The shapes moved with purpose, with intelligence. They were exploring the space behind the screen, mapping it, learning it. And occasionally, one of them would pause and seem to look directly at me. The next morning, I told my parents we needed a new television. Ours was broken, I said, old and unreliable. They were surprisingly agreeable. They'd been talking about upgrading to a bigger screen anyway. We donated the old television to charity that weekend. I felt a twinge of guilty as we loaded it into the donation truck, knowing I was passing the problem to someone else. But I was 15 and scared, and self-preservation won over moral responsibility. The new television worked perfectly. No static, no mysterious channels, no impossible images, just normal programming and normal silence when it was turned off. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself listening for that familiar hiss. And sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, I'd see that endless hallway with its flickering fluorescent lights and closed doors. The difference now was that I knew where it led. That exit door at the end of the corridor, the one painted blood red and standing slightly ajar, that was the way out. Not into our world, that door led somewhere else entirely, somewhere the static creatures could exist in full form instead of hiding behind glass screens. 6 months after we got rid of the television, I read a news story about a family found dead in their home across town. No signs of violence, no obvious cause of death. They were discovered sitting in their living room, facing their television, which was on, but showing only static. The coroner said they appeared to have died of fright. But what the news didn't report, what I learned from a friend whose father was one of the responding officers, was that the family's faces were frozen in expressions of perfect terror, and their eyes were fixed not on the television screen, but on empty air just above and behind where each sat, as if they had seen something the rest of us couldn't see. I never tried to find out what happened to our old television. I didn't want to know which thrift store sold it, or which family bought it, or whether they were still using it. Some knowledge is too dangerous, and some doors are better left unopened. But I learned something important that night. There are frequencies between the channels, spaces between the signals, where other things live and wait and watch. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to tune in at exactly the wrong moment, they'll tune into you too. The signal is always broadcasting. It's always looking for new viewers. All you have to do is watch. But I'd recommend you don't.